Well, Germany's Chancellor had another warning at the conference directed at the United States. Take a listen.
Even the United States will not be powerful enough to go it alone. Dear friends, being a part of NATO is not only Europe's competitive advantage, it's also the United States' competitive advantage. So let's repair and revive transatlantic trust together.
Well, Matthew Karnitschnig is the editor-in-chief of Euractiv. He joins us live from Brussels. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So this is being described as a pivotal moment for European security. What is fundamentally different this time?
Well, that's a very good question because I keep hearing this, and I was thinking back to last year and the year before, and those were also pivotal moments or described as such. And I think that it's always been right because of the precarious situation that Europe is in at the moment with the war raging in Ukraine and really the stalemate there. And there are a lot of questions about how Ukraine is going to get out of this. But as long as the Europeans are willing to keep funding the war, and they've already committed $35 billion so far this year to keep the Ukrainians fighting, I think that we will just see a continuation of the status quo. And as long as the United States continues to sell the Ukrainian weapons with European money, I think that we're just going to see a continuation of this. There are a lot of questions about how far Europe is going to be able to go to care for its own security in the long term. But the reality is that these are processes that are going to take many, many years, if not decades. And Europe is still very much reliant on the United States. I think that the United States also likes it that way more than maybe Washington is willing to acknowledge. What they expect from Europe is that Europe is a bit more subservient to US wishes. And we certainly see that every time Donald Trump talks about NATO and demands from NATO partners that they spend more money on defense, meaning in his worldview, they should be buying more American equipment. So I think we're going to see a continuation of this trend after this conference and probably for some years to come, because the reality is that the Europeans have nowhere else to go. They have no other major potential partners who can protect them the way the United States does.
I want to ask you about those comments from the German Chancellor Merz, who said, the rules-based order is effectively over, but that the US won't be able to stand alone. To what extent is that true?
I think it is true, which is why I think we, continue to hear from the U.S. administration that they still are committed to NATO. They just want a rebalancing of the burden. So-called burden sharing is a buzzword we've heard in recent years. I think that people in the White House and beyond understand how important Europe is to the U.S., not just in terms of security and U.S. interests around the world, but also in terms of the U.S. economy. Europe is the most important trading partner for the United States, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So there is this kind of interdependence there. The reality is, though, is that in this relationship, it is somewhat lopsided. The U.S. has more leverage because the U.S. takes care of European security. And just to cite one thing that's often overlooked here is that the U.S. nuclear umbrella is massive compared to what Europe can bring to bear. The US has more than 5,000 nuclear warheads. Europe combined, France and Germany are the only nuclear powers in Europe, have just over 500, and their missiles don't have the same range as the American arsenal, meaning that they don't have the same kind of deterrent vis-a-vis Russia or China that they have with the US. And so this is really why we're seeing the Europeans now talking more about some kind of expansion of the European nuclear umbrella in Europe. But here again, this is a project that would be massively expensive, would take many, many years to put into effect. So it's always going to be easier for the Europeans to rely on the United States. And I think that many here are also thinking, well, Trump is not going to be around forever. We'll see what happens after Trump. We'll see who comes into the White House. We saw this the last time after his first term. As soon as Joe Biden came in, they went back to basically the status quo. I think many here regret that. And there's still a lot of talk about longer term, we're going to do all of this on our own. There's going to be strategic autonomy and so on. But the other sort of hard truth in Europe right now is that the European economy is not doing very well. We're talking about very highly indebted countries, especially France. And the German economy has been stagnant for over 5 years now. So they're not really in a position to invest these huge sums in the military that they would like.
You write that Iran is expanding its missile and nuclear capabilities with the potential to reach Europe. What's the risk if that threat is left on the margins, given how much focus there is right now on Russia's war in Ukraine?
Well, this is a huge threat for the Europeans, and another reason I think that they're going to keep the United States as close as possible. The Iranian ballistic program has a range basically of 2,000 kilometers, which means it could easily reach European territory. And it's something that's been overlooked now in the broader political debate, I would say. And recently we've seen more tension because of the slaughter basically of Iranian civilians by the regime there. That has forced the European Union to take a harder line towards the regime in Tehran, I think more so than many would like to. And that has heightened tensions. And I think that, this is something that many here are worried about because there's a long history of terror attacks by the Iranian mullahs basically being ordered in Europe. And we've also seen close cooperation between Iran and Russia, particularly in the area of drones, with Iran supplying the Russians with a lot of the drones that they're using in Ukraine already. So this is a big, big fear. And I think that the Europeans are closely watching what President Trump is planning in Iran. The U.S. has obviously just ordered another aircraft carrier to head into the Gulf. So I think this is, these kinds of tensions are very keenly felt here in Europe, also because Europe would be the first place to feel the effects of a potential war beyond the Middle East, with the potential for refugees and all kinds of unrest that could bring about.
Matthew Karnitschnig, appreciate your analysis. Thanks for joining us.